Good afternoon. My name is Jimmy Garland. I'm the president of the Clarksville branch in NAACP. Tonight is the first night of a series of political forums that we're going to be holding for the upcoming election, November the 3rd. Tonight, as our moderator, we have our first vice, Ms. Loretta Morris, who will be actually asking the question. We don't want to hold up our guests. So at this time, I introduce to some and present to other our first vice president for the Clarksville branch 5582, Ms. Loretta Morris. Loretta?
Thank you. I want to thank, you know what, unmute yourself and please say your name because I know I was going to butcher it.
Kiran Sripada.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. We had invited U.S. Representative Mark Green. He had a prior engagement. We also invited the other candidate, Ronald Brown. He said he was going to be here, but he hasn't made it in yet. Okay. So, but we're going to go ahead and hold the forum. Please unmute yourself and go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself. We got a whole hour, so we might as well go ahead.
I guess it's my luck that it's just me, right, for the hour. My name is Kieran. I'm the Democratic nominee for this seat, for the U.S. House seat in the 7th District here. I live just east of Franklin in a town called College Grove, this district is large, and we've obviously been going across it for the entire span of the campaign. Clarksville is our second base, so to speak, outside of my house, and we do a lot of activities there, including coordinated lit drops. So you may have seen me around every weekend. We've got a lit drop going on there. We work closely with a gentleman there named Ronnie Glynn, who's running for the state Senate seat. But look, my background is that I was a small business owner for a number of years. And then in 2010, I felt like government was just not reflecting us as a people. And I mean that in terms of the tone and the culture. And so I decided to go into the civil service. I thought the civil service is the best way I can have an impact. I went to the Government Accountability Office and I worked across a lot of different agencies, nearly every federal agency there is, including the National Security apparatus and the National Security Council. And it was a great, great time for me because it was some of the proudest work I had ever done. It was work that I thought reflected its true nonpartisanship, right? Every civil servant's a nonpartisan employee, and it's checked over and over and over by a number of people. So it was great. And then I thought things could not get worse, and the tone of this country just kept changing for the worse. You know, along the way, while I was at GAO, I went after my PhD in public policy. I thought, if I could educate myself on everything, maybe I'd have a clearer idea as to how to better affect people. But at some point, my wife and I, we looked around. My wife is a physician. She's a pulmonary and critical care physician. So she's in the ICU a lot. My kids are 6 and 2. We looked around and we thought, nothing about this government, nothing about the representative here in this district, about the way things are done, reflect our values, reflect how things should be done and how we can move forward. And that's when I decided to run. I basically thought my impact can be best suited if I can make a difference and make my voice heard. I wanted to use the experience I had in government to put forth, solutions over rhetoric. I don't go out, I don't criticize my opponent, Mark Green, at least on a personal level. I did tell him very clearly, I said, I will take your policy stances and your votes and your public statements on policies to task. I will make sure that they are public and they're the things I'm focusing on. And that's what we've done. And it's been successful for us because all we care about is essentially how do we make life better? And we do that through an approach of access and access to opportunity. So we talk about expanding healthcare, not just in terms of insurance, but in terms of the rural clinics. We have a lot of rural counties in this district. And one of the reasons for that is because it expands access to healthcare. And from healthcare, healthy people usually have better opportunities. You have a better way to attack things like coronavirus. And you have a system that's at least a little more responsive to your community. We also talk about improving infrastructure, and we're talking about physical infrastructure, roads, tunnels, bridges, electrical grids, and we're also talking about broadband. Broadband needs to be instituted across this district. I would argue across this country. There's plenty of places that don't have access to that. You're limiting the way students can learn. You're limiting the way telehealth can be practiced. You're limiting small business opportunities in terms of getting new clients and people who buy their goods. But you're also just limiting information. I can't get access to the latest journal reports about coronavirus. I can't get access to potentially the latest and most factual stories out there for me to make a judgment about how I want this country to go if I don't have broadband. You know, you're not going to get all the newspapers delivered to you on a daily basis. And finally, you know, one of the biggest things I'm passionate about is public education. We think that, and I say we because my wife and I are very much in line on this, but a child living anywhere in this district anywhere in the country for that matter, should not suffer from a lower quality of education just because of where they live. That's just not the way we design things. We don't need to penalize students and children like that. And they should have the best education possible no matter where they live in this country, and gives them the biggest opportunity. These are the kinds of solutions we want to put forth. There's plenty more. I'm proud of our website, kieranforcongress.com, because it has plenty of those solutions. But you know, notice that all of it is about the policy. It's about how we pay for it and the return that we get. It's about how it affects people. It's not about the rhetoric. It's not about whose party is gonna, you know, triumph over everyone. It's just about how to make our lives better in sensible ways. And I think that's something that people are getting behind more and more, and we're excited about the next few weeks to keep doing that.
All right. All right. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. And I'm on board with everything that you said. All right. Now let's go into our question. Okay. The first question. COVID-19 has devastated citizens across not only this nation, but also the world. With more than 200,000 deaths and 10,000 people unemployed. What do you think your role will be to get America back on track to becoming the most power democratically ruled nation across the world?
Sure. So let's talk about COVID and sort of the way that we can go about this. And we can talk about the early response to COVID as well. But for right now, let me look forward. Right. This is where we stand today. How do we move forward? How do we continue funding valuable research? Because that's what we need to do in order to get the best vaccine possible. We've done a little bit of that with the private-public partnerships with Pfizer and with others, I think AstraZeneca as well, and the University of Oxford. We can do more. Research plays a huge role in understanding this virus and understanding how to attack it the best. We used to fund research quite extensively. We used to actually go to institutions and say, please tell us how we can do better. Please research this one topic and let us know what it is you find to the greatest extent possible. And we got huge returns for it. And I mean good societal returns. There was a defense group called DARPA for a long time, and they still fund research. It's not as much as they used to, but they had a 20% success rate. Now, you might think that's not a great success rate, but that 20% were things like MRIs, were things like new pharmaceuticals, were things like satellite and GPS technology. I mean, these are things that had profound impacts on our society. So this is the kind of research we need to ramp up funding for. In terms of our own, the vaccine that's being developed, we definitely need to have safeguards in place. We've politicized our institutions a lot over the last few years. We've had politicians in place in this district and in others who have blamed the CDC as not being trustworthy, or the FDA as not being trustworthy. I will tell you this, as a former civil servant, and I think anybody, especially in Clarksville, with such a large veteran community, anybody who's been in that position to be in service of the government and not in the political side knows that your job and your priority is always the work and the way it impacts the country. It is not about, you know, your personal feelings towards any politician. And we do a good job of separating that out when we do that work. So we have to trust the FDA and the CDC and say, please help us. Continue giving us good studies and things like that. If we do that, and I think that there's, I mean, of course, I'm the Democratic candidate, so I'm a little biased, but I believe that there is only one person in the presidential race, at least, and one person in this congressional race who's willing to do that. And that's myself and obviously the President, Joe Biden. The idea here is that ramping up this kind of research will have great effects for us. It'll help us understand how to solve a medical problem. That's what this is. There's a public health issue here too. We need to do better at conveying information to people across the country. right? You can't play political football with masks. That's it. Like, you've got to be able to convey to people, here's what the danger is, here's what we need you to do. And this is not a Democrat or Republican thing. People die and COVID affects people regardless of what your political affiliation is. This is straight a public health problem that needs to be solved by politicians. And they need to come together. And I'm willing to do that. I've done this in a nonpartisan fashion, but I think that we need to come together to convey, look, here's the timeline in place. You know, we had this, and this is where I'm going to go and look back. We knew in February that if we did certain things, things would be better. And then we didn't do it because the administration and anyone that followed him were not willing to do that. And then we suffered for it. Then in March, we said, oh, well, hindsight's 2020, but here's what we could do that might make things better. And then no one did anything about it from the administration. And then April came, we said, well, hindsight's still 2020. I mean, there's a pattern here. Every single month we look back and say, well, we could have done it better, but hindsight's 2020. And yet, if we had just acted on what we knew at that moment, things would be a lot better. That's what I'll say in terms of, like, this is where we are now. We know what we need to do for public health. We know we can do social distancing and masks and still wash hands and keep some sort of decorum when we're out in public. And if we all do that, we can carry on with normal lives. Look at states like New York, which had terrible cases and a huge number of cases affect them. They are now going out with masks, with social distancing, and safely opening up restaurants, opening up small businesses. And they've been doing this for a little bit. We can do that here too, without also worrying about the cases going up every single day. And then one last thing I'll say about this is that this is another area where justice can play a huge part. Coronavirus has disproportionately affected the Black community across this country. It has disproportionately affected every minority community across this country. That is not some sort of weird coincidence. There are things about healthcare that play a role in that, and the reason why people maybe don't have great health coming into this coronavirus and the pandemic and continue to receive good healthcare during the pandemic. We have to address that as well. We can't have communities basically being disproportionately affected because of conscious decisions we made. We need to consciously go in and rectify that as well. And I think we can do that through better healthcare. We can do that through better hospital access, and we can definitely do that by paying attention to all our communities, not just the richest ones.
Okay, thank you. Next question. There is much discussion about the use of the mail-in or absentee ballot during the November 3rd election cycle. The practice has been used by more than 6 states for some time now. How would you react to possible challenges that could be mounted by the current administration concerning the credibility of the process that has come in play during COVID-19?
If the administration, or anybody for that matter, says that there's some credibility issue, I would ask them for proof. Now, I know that this president is hard to get proof from. There's a lot of statements that are made and there's nothing really to back it up. But there's a lot of other people out there who aren't as skilled as he is at kind of delivering that misinformation. And I would ask them that. I would say, where's your proof that absentee ballots are actually causing any problems? What we know is this, as a fact in this country and in other countries, by the way, that have done mail-in ballots. Mail-in ballots are no more susceptible to fraud than any other type of voting. And in this country, the United States, that rate is very, very low, in the single digits, literally in the single vote count in some cases. We do not have that problem. In North Carolina, they had a problem like that about a year or two ago, and it was because a Republican operative went in and tried to rig the election for the gentleman who's running there. I mean, I'm not just trying to point that out to say it's a party problem. I'm saying you can find examples like this to back up your line if you want to. But overall, there is no fraud problem with that. The biggest problem we had in Tennessee, as we saw in this most recent primary election, is that a lot of votes were rejected because they said the signature on the ballot did not match the signature on the voter ID card, the voter registration card rather. And that was a big problem. So we've told everyone, if you're going to mail in ballot, make sure your signature matches exactly, make sure you're following the guidelines, make sure you send it in with a week and a half to spare because you want the post office to get it there. But to the critics, I would say, please show me anywhere in the United States where that's happened. Like you said, 6 states have done it consistently for a long period of time. They've not had any problems with it. I don't know of any proof where we can show it's going to be a problem here.
Okay, thank you. Due to the recent death of Justice Ginsburg, the current administration is moving forward in confirming a new justice before the November 3rd election. During the 2016 election, the Senate ruled it improper for President Obama nominee to be considered due to pending votes by the residents of this nation. What is your position concerning the Senate actions concerning the nomination, and how would you vote if you were a current member of the Senate?
About this nomination, I would say that Republicans are being hypocrites because, as you said, in 2016, when Merrick Garland was nominated by then President Obama, they dragged their feet and said, no, we're not going to do it. And there's a lot of arguments they make now. I hear that, oh, well, if the president and the Senate are in the same party, then that's different than what happened in 2016. And please, I'll say this. If I were in the Senate right now, I would go and I would show up. If they're going to have a vote, I would show up for the vote. And the reason is because as much as I don't want the process to continue, because I want it to be as fair to Merrick Garland as they made that to be, I also know that we have jobs to do. And the thing that I think hurts America the most is when you say, I'm going to do my job and then don't do it. I wish the Democrats in 2016 had better orchestrated the confirmation of Merrick Garland. I wish they had done that. But you know what? As we just did a video on Supreme Court nominations, the job of the president is to nominate, the job of the Senate is to confirm. I would like to hold that up. But if I can't, and if Mitch McConnell is going to hold a vote, and if I'm in the Senate, I will show up to vote, and I'll show up to vote no. Because this is not the way you nominate a justice. And I know this nominee. I've read about her. I've read some of her decisions and her court cases and her opinions. I do not believe that she is someone who will be fair on the court and serve as a good balance. And balance is important, right? When Justice Scalia died, they said it had to be a conservative nominee in order to balance the court. Well, Justice Ginsburg has died, so I'd make the argument that it should probably have to be a liberal nominee in order to balance the court. So that's where I'd be. Now, I'm not running for the Senate, so I won't be facing that dilemma. But this is the political stuff that I think people hate about Washington. It's unfortunate. I wish we could stop it, but I also know we have jobs to do, and I think that we should work within those parameters as well.
Okay, you got a valid point there. Okay. Over the past 4 years, America has become a nation in isolation. Even our neighbors to our north and south do not want Americans to visit their country. Should you be elected, what is your plan to assist this nation to regain its status as a leader of the free world?
The leadership, because you mentioned immigration or people visiting from other countries. My parents are immigrants. My parents came, my dad came 50 years ago. My mother came about 40 years ago. And they came for a better life. They came for educational opportunities. They, finished those and they stayed for me and my sister and the lives that we could have and we did end up having. And all the opportunities that they saw in trying to achieve their version of the American dream. That's gone, and therefore so is the allure of coming to this country in a lot of cases. And maybe it never even existed for some people in this country. But those are the problems that we have to tackle if you really want to make this country appealing. If you want to make it strong and if you want to make it a leader, you have to start with understanding why people either don't have the opportunities within the country and why they may not have access to those opportunities if they come to this country. So within the country, we've got to improve things like healthcare, like our education system. We've got to have some sort of economic system that doesn't just work off of corporate welfare, but instead looks at our everyday citizens. I always say focus on working families and small businesses and you won't go wrong. Like you'll find people there that you can help across the board and you won't really have to cater to corporations. They're going to be fine. I don't think anyone's going to shed a tear for, the corporations. They're going to be okay. But for the immigrants, they look at that. That's what they look at. They look at, does America have a strong economy? Does it have the opportunities within? Are the educational systems set up so that I would be envious of that as being someone who is from a foreign country? Is the healthcare system set up so that I know that I'm going to be taken care of and healthy when I'm in the United States? Those are the things that make America appealing to immigrants. And I think that one last thing on that, diplomacy is important. The United States, when Donald Trump came into office, cut the State Department dramatically. Essentially, he was telling the world that diplomacy was not a priority of his. And that's a terrible idea. Even the Secretary of Defense at that time, General Mattis, said, if you don't have diplomacy, if you don't fund the State Department, I'm going to have to buy more bullets. And what he was saying was, if you don't prioritize diplomacy, we're just going to be fighting. That is not something that we can do. We have to restore our diplomatic efforts, and we have to make sure that we tell the world we're willing to work with you, we're willing to trade with you, we're willing to have stand up for human rights, and we're willing to do that because we domestically have once again restored opportunity and justice to our citizens. We want to make sure that the rest of the world enjoys the same things. I think doing that will go a long way to restoring ourselves as sort of this beacon in the world.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I have one more question, okay? And then we'll open it up to the audience because we still have some time, okay? Education is the new moral currency when addressing the worth and the wealth of a democracy. Many nations are investing in the education of their next generation to ensure that citizens are prepared to cope with challenges our students will surely face upon entering the workforce of the global economy. What do you think your role is as a senator to ensure, or as a U.S. House representative, to ensure our students are prepared to deal with these challenges?
Yeah, this is an easy one for me. It is fully funding our public education system. And what that means is that we serve as a backstop, the federal government. Sorry, were you about to say something?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, we serve as a backstop, right? We basically, as a federal government, we take the input of the communities and we look across them and say, look, where are communities that are doing phenomenally well and their schools are doing phenomenally well? That's fine, they're gonna be okay. Where are schools that are not? Where are the ones that are lagging behind? Where are the ones that don't have new buildings, don't have enough books, don't have smart classrooms, don't have access to online modules? Where are the ones where kids are not getting tablets or laptops to help them get access to all those great learning initiatives? Where is it that we don't have the broadband access to make sure that the kids can actually access those within that tablet and laptop? These are the things the federal government should be fully funding. We should be paying teachers more. We should be paying them a fair salary, and we should make sure that we're attracting great ones. And we would do that if we made it a competitive market, if we actually paid them well as they should be. Doing that will create some more cohesive classroom instruction, but also we have a lot of community input to take in, right? The federal government cannot go in and just say, Clarksville, you're going to do it like this. Franklin, you're going to do it like this, and so on and so forth, and Lawrenceburg and wherever. You can't sit there and say, here's how you're going to do it. You have to go in and say, tell us what it is you need. Tell us what it is you need to make the school what you want it to be, to bring it up to sort of those standards where students have access to all those resources. I once heard someone say that, it's not that we should be diverting funds into other private schools or anything like that. We should make our schools these like learning palaces, and think people would actually respond to it. I think children would actually respond to it, have a better time learning and learn much more. And we all know that the returns on that are immeasurable. Of course, there's financial and sort of production returns and things like that are very, in the details and math oriented. But there's also great returns, like people have less propensity to go to jail, to be addicted to substances, illicit substances, to head down paths that they may not want to head down in terms of personal or even family depression. We also know, though, that it gives people more of an opportunity to dictate what they want their lives to be. And when people are happy with what they're doing and where they're going, it's a generally happier and more well-oiled society, so to speak, where people are actually doing what's best for everyone else and themselves. So I think education is key. I think fully funding it is the big problem. And one thing I'll say to that before somebody starts saying, oh, well, we fund so much per student and all that, we do not. We do not fund that on an individual level in our public schools. We do not do that. We do if you take into account private schools and a lot of different rich communities in this country, because property taxes in those communities usually fund the school. So yeah, Beverly Hills is going to give their school $100 million. Like that of course will bring the numbers up. But we don't do that broadly. We don't do that for every kid in this district, and that's a shame. That's something that we need to change.
Okay. All right. Well, those were my questions. Okay. We can open it up for the floor to see if anybody else has any questions.
This is Beulah Odom speaking. Can you hear me, Ms. Loretta?
Yes, darling, you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. Yesterday, I looked at a show on Aging Matters, and they were talking about the aging population in rural communities, not only in Tennessee, but across the country. And one of the things that they brought up that I thought was interesting, that Tennessee is second in the nation to rural hospitals closing. That we've had 13 rural hospitals closing, and they spoke to Haywood County in West Tennessee and Morgan County in East Tennessee, but they also talked about hospitals in Tullahoma and Humboldt, which is, on each end of the state as well. What would be some of the things that you would consider bringing to the attention of the House of Representatives in regards to addressing some of these needs? Because we're all aging, and that is something that, yes, it affects the elderly, but it actually affects everybody. So Tennessee is second in the country with the closure of rural hospitals.
Yeah, and just to add on to the list that you named, in this county, we've also got in McNary and Selmer, we had a closure in Decatur as well. We have to understand why they closed first, I think, to be able to understand how to bring it back, really. A lot of these hospitals closed because they lacked the funding. And that funding was basically cut off by the state. There was a lot of Medicaid funding involved in that. And when the state didn't expand Medicaid and didn't actually go through to give communities the money that they needed, they basically were sentencing a lot of these hospitals, to death. And pardon the pun, given them healthcare, but that's what happened, and that is the result of what happened as well. So, this is why I'm a proponent of expanding Medicare, because from the federal side, we can do the same kind of things. We can do the same kind of funding to communities to help build up their rural hospitals. And just keep in mind one thing, people always say, well, those rural hospitals didn't make any money. I have news for that person that says that. Rural hospitals do not have to make money. They just have to be self-sustaining. They do not need to go in and make millions of dollars in profit. They need to serve the community. And we can do that with public healthcare funds. The other thing we have to look at is the reason some of the people were not using a lot of those clinics and hospitals were because we had the wrong specialties there. So you talked about an aging population, your question, we have to cater to that. We've got to make sure we've got cardiologists, pulmonologists, geriatric specialists, and nurses that correspond to that as well, and not necessarily 3 plastic surgeons as one hospital had. And it was there just on kind of just to have. These are the kinds of decisions we need to make sure we right size the hospital for the community. We have to also make sure we're training enough physicians and nurses who want to go into rural areas, which also means we've got to start tackling things like student debt or incentives to actually work in rural areas to make sure that they're getting good people to staff those hospitals. And once you do that, you'll find these communities will also turn around because you're building sort of an economic system there too. So there's sort of this, ongoing effect of when you invest in these hospitals. But that's generally, you got to go in there. And I also say this, you don't need a level 1 trauma center in every single county in Tennessee. What you need sometimes are clinics, sometimes you need emergency rooms, and sometimes you do need a hospital. But those are the decisions the community has a lot of input into and tells you, just like they'll tell you, hey, we need 2 pulmonologists and 1 cardiologist and the nurses that correspond to it. So those are the kinds of things that healthcare funding would also help with in terms of expanding Medicare.
The next question is around the covert. In regards to, I saw on the TV the other day where an individual got a $1 million bill. And I know that in some strange way, if the government is going to assist these folks in paying these bills, how would you work within Tennessee to make sure that people are not saddled with these bills that they have no control of? I mean, if they've got the virus, they don't have no control over the 40, 50, 70-day hospitalizations that they've experienced because of the result of getting the virus.
Right. And I'll just add one thing to that. If we don't take care of this problem, my wife, as I said, is an ICU specialist. If we don't take care of this problem, what she's told me is that she's had patients who have said we didn't go to the hospital or get tested because they were just afraid of the bill, which means they're walking around our communities infected, potentially contagious, and all of that. So this is a huge problem. Yes, this is why one of the parts of expanding Medicare is to fully insure people. Healthcare is a right. You don't get to choose when you get sick. You need to get over the fact that you get to choose your health insurance. It's got to be coming. Now, how we get there is something that me and other people can argue about, and I have my own plan out there. But the idea is this: if you suffer from COVID-19, you should be covered. This is a public health emergency. This is not something that is, common, and it's not something we took care of well. It means that we need to make sure people are not going to be saddled with $1 million bill. And in many cases, I think the average right now in Tennessee is about $75,000 with the treatments. But that's just part of the problem, right? That's just attacking this problem. How do we make sure that doesn't happen in the future? And that's where I advocate for expanding out healthcare access through the insurance market as well. Covering people under 30 and over 55 in Medicare makes it, balances out the costs. Making sure that you have people at work who are able to access it helps them get, choose into Medicare if they want to. But more importantly, let's say you don't have a job. Let's say you're one of those 10 million people that lost your job. How are you going to get health insurance? You can't unless you have a Medicare expansion that addresses that. That coverage is our shield against things like $1 million bill. There are other legal things that we can do as well. We can make sure that medical bankruptcies are no longer things that you cannot do. Medical bankruptcies are one of the leading reasons in this state people go bankrupt. We need to make sure that the laws around that benefit patients and individuals and not the insurance company. And I know that we have a lot of private hospitals here. I would like to make it very clear. Medicare expansion is making the insurance market more competitive. It is not taking over a healthcare system. HCA is not going to close down tomorrow. They are going to just work with a different insurance carrier. And what that means is you still get to have great healthcare, but you do it at a fraction of the cost. And I'll just give you the cost example beyond COVID. I mean, the average healthcare policy for a family of four like mine, for instance, in Tennessee, the average is $7,000. The average salary in Tennessee is under $40,000. So if you're a family and you make the average salary, most of your disposable income is going to healthcare without even hitting your deductible. That's the kind of stuff expanded healthcare would also help with. So these are all things. This is why healthcare is the #1 priority for not just me. Every time we talk to people across the district, it's healthcare. How do we make it more effective, cost efficient, and affordable?
Okay, thank you. Do we have anybody else with any questions?
Excuse me. I have a question with respects to your opinion. As you can tell, there's police brutality across our country, and there's this thing with respects to defunding law enforcement and things of that nature. What is your opinion for defunding and or not defunding the police, and why? Okay.
I don't know how this is going to play. I don't like the term defunding the police because I don't think it's an accurate term. I don't think anyone's explained that to me with one definition. And every time I look for different things, this is not on you. I'm saying like, this is just generally how I look at this. Look, there's police brutality across this country, as you said. There's unjust stops. And, I used this as an example once where I said, people have to be able to empathize, right? If you think that this can't happen to you, first of all, you're wrong, especially as a minority. I think there are different things in history that have happened that have shown this can happen to anyone. But I always say to people like, I never understood police brutality, or I never understood even profiling to a certain degree until after 9/11. And then that decade where I was in my 20s, I was single, I was traveling a lot for work. That showed me a lot about what profiling was like and basically why you would maybe not get let back into the country without a 3-hour interrogation and things like that. And I remember telling people that was a drop in the bucket. Now imagine how I was angry at the drop in the bucket. Imagine how angry you must be if you got the whole bucket thrown at you. So there are things we can do to address police brutality. I outlined them in detail on our website, but basically there was a lot of oversight initiatives we had that especially were coming in during the end of the Obama administration, not just in terms of body cameras, but in terms of civilian review boards and in terms of the federal government being a third-party arbitrator between people. And especially when you had police departments that were questioned, you could have a third party that was impartial come in and say, look, let me mediate between you two if that was appropriate. But you also had oversight. You know, you can investigate, you know, internal affairs has this great image and TV and all that stuff, but sometimes we need an outside source. That was the organization I work for, the Government Accountability Office. It was the outside investigator that come in, impartially evaluate what happened. So there's that. There are trainings that need to happen. I was disappointed when I saw that the administration canceled the federal anti-bias training. This is an important training. I remember this training when I was in the government. It was very good. It was very much unlike a lot of the trainings I had and I worked with the law enforcement officers there at the Marshal Service, the FBI, in the intel community. They thought it was an excellent training module. These are things we can impart to local police. We do not need to militarize our police. And why I'm saying this is because this goes back to my first point. When you talk about defunding, what I'm talking about is restructuring. There are communities in this country that do not need the military apparatus that we sell them. And we give them grants to do that. And we should not be doing that. That is taking away some of that you know, tank carriers and the tank type vehicles and the heavy artillery that we see in local communities. There are also communities out there that have refused to have people help come in and arbitrate between two parties. We need to basically make that a federal thing to make sure that we can't have that. We also have people out there that have said we don't have a problem. And this is important to remember because communities do have different levels of problems, right? There's police departments that probably have no issues. There's police departments that have a lot of issues, and we need to look at different communities and have a right-sized solution for all of them. You cannot have one national policy across the board and just say, yes, all of you are going to do this. You have some baseline stuff that you follow. But these are important. And then there's also taking away some of the duties that police officers have now that maybe fit better with other people. We cut mental health services, we cut social services, we cut professionals in those areas for years. And what it did was it basically burdened police officers with those kind of calls. When we used to have people go out there who were professionals in mental health and say, let me evaluate people, professionals in developmental disabilities to evaluate people on the autism spectrum, so that they could do so with some sort of insight into what was happening and not just the police training. Police officers can do a lot. They should not be expected to go above and beyond what their normal responsibilities are and perform in these areas. So I mention all these things because what we're talking about here, and I also include things like recruiting from the community, having accurate reflections within your police force of the people that live in the community that you're policing. But what we're talking about here is restructuring how the police departments in this country actually work. Defunding is a great political term that I think Republicans have latched onto because it's easy to say you want to take money from our police officers. Nobody is advocating, I mean, maybe very few are, but for the most part, nobody is advocating that we lose the safety and service and professionalism of good officers. And that's what they should be doing, right? They should be serving communities, not threatening, not necessarily making people live in fear, but serving communities. When you have good community interactions, you have a good and effective police force, and you have a community that feels that they can trust the police without having to initially antagonize the police. And I think that that's the biggest thing we've lost. We've lost why they should have a relationship as opposed to who's right. That's what we keep talking about. So I know I went on a lot of different things, but I was trying to recollect a lot of the different policies that were in there, but essentially it's a restructure. It's basically making them right size, making the police officers do what they're supposed to do, respond to law enforcement calls, and innocent until proven guilty. Remember that nice little feature of the justice system that we're supposed to have. Arrest, detain, make sure that we're not 2.8 times more likely to kill men in a Black community than we are in men in any other community. That is an issue as well. That is a real issue. And I always say we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And what that means is basically we can address our problems while also not vilifying or demonizing people.
Just to follow up with that question, if I may, I understand, and I think I heard you say that you think that programs like getting people out there, maybe mental health specialists and all these things, to maybe take on that part of the responsibility out there. Maybe I don't know if I understood you correctly, but I guess the concern that I would have on the other side is that, because we have no real gun control, you have to have the law enforcement officer out there who the most people that they deal with have two things going on. One, we have no gun control whatsoever, so we don't know what we're up against. And then on the other side of that spectrum, most people that that they deal with out on the street are having some type of mental illness episode to some degree, however minor, however major. And now we're saying, well, let's send a psychologist out there or a psychiatrist out there to maybe deal with that. And now you're jeopardizing the life safety of those folks. We have to really rethink what we're talking about when we talk about doing that, because life, in the sense of what the way we see it now versus the way my grandparents grew up, is totally different. Here in the great state of Tennessee, we legalize guns and cars as extensions of homes. But I bet if you go pull statistics, you're going to find that now we have car burglaries that have, not auto thefts, but car burglaries that have increased. Why? Because most people are careless and they forget about the weaponry that they have in their car because of kids, groceries, or whatever. And their mindset is, I'll get it the next day. You know, and they're not breaking in the cars, they're just finding them unlocked. Now we're putting more guns out on the street simply because we just made something simple that sounded good at the time to allow guns to be in cars as an extension of homes.
I think you bring up a couple valid points here. And I'm going to get to gun safety in a second, but I'm not advocating that people just blindly go out without understanding the safety implications here. But we did have a time where mental health professionals worked with officers to be the front line, with the officers being there for protection, and it worked. But the other thing is this: when it comes to people having the episode, as you put it, mental health professionals do not go in with the same attitude as potentially law enforcement, and that's good, right? Law enforcement, I think, should go in the attitude with the suspicion that things might go wrong. But understanding that they also may not. But mental health professionals will probably tell you that most of those people who are having episodes are not immediately violent or are not immediately threats to safety. It's something that usually happens along the way as they're talking to the person or as they're trying to understand what's going on, that sets them into a different direction than maybe you want them to go. And that's something only they, I think, can evaluate. But you do have that safety aspect of a police officer that you're working with. On guns, though, I do agree with you. We have let this problem go unchecked. I mean, I'm proud that Moms Demand Action gave me the gun sense distinction candidate. And all that means is that I put out policies that are sensible, like things that the majority of Americans are fine with, like universal background checks, like making sure that people don't get access to weapons when they do have mental health issues, making sure that you have a mechanism by which people who are on the no-fly list are suddenly able to buy weapons, making sure that you close loopholes where after 3 days, if your background check doesn't come through, you're suddenly able to bypass the background check. Well, that's a loophole. That's a pretty nice loophole for a lot of people. The gun show loophole, the internet gun sales one. When I was in government, we did a great report, the GAO did, on how easy it was to buy guns over the internet on the dark web. And it was frighteningly easy. These are things I agree with you on. There's a general approach to this where 99.9% of gun owners, I think, are responsible. And then the rest of them are the ones we have to set laws in place for, to make sure they don't get weapons, to make sure you do know what you're doing with your gun, so you're not leaving it lying around in a car to be burglarized, or a child to pick up and just accidentally shoot someone. These are all part of a broader gun policy that emphasizes responsible safety, which I think many Americans can do without advocating for free and open just sales of all guns. But I also will just point out one thing on the gun debate. I do find it interesting that when people who are Second Amendment proponents without any restrictions, they say we shouldn't have any restrictions on the amendment. Well, on the First Amendment, we know you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. So there are some limitations to basically what you can do, especially when public safety is involved. But they also are all for buying up weaponry as you're right, as long as it's them and their friends. If you suddenly put that in a different perspective, where they said if maybe people that look like me we're going to buy up all the weapons that we could. Suddenly the opinion changes. Well, we need to make sure you guys can do that. Same thing in the Black community, I think, as I've been educated by Killer Mike on many occasions. Like, you know, the idea is that if you put him out there and he advocates for this and you try to get a whole bunch of Black people or brown people to go and buy weapons, there's going to be a lot of suspicion. There's going to be some great background checks that day. So this is the kind of thing that we know is a double standard, and we know it's motivated by a fear, by some racism. It's also why we know that we can have sensible gun policies, because there's a willingness to accept there are limitations to how we sell weapons. Maybe for them, it's the people that buy them. And for me, it's maybe the criminal background that someone might have, or the if they haven't served their sentence, or the fact that they can't pass that background check, or they're just getting weapons handed to them, for instance, through inheritances without actually understanding that they might need a license. You know, I went through the process to get weapons. Many times when I was living in other states as well. And there are things that won't burden responsible gun owners that we can do. And they're the things that I just talked about. The only people they'll burden are the people who shouldn't be getting weapons.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much. Okay. We are actually coming up on the hour, and we are going to have to close. Okay. I greatly appreciate you coming on and giving us your thoughts on each and every one of our questions. We learned a lot from you, okay? We understand where you're going, okay? And
Mr.
Yes, ma'am.
I had just one more question to ask the candidate. Is it possible?
We are actually closing.
Oh, it's 6:50. I was thought that 10 more minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
I know that you mentioned this, but I saw the other day in some responses from the representatives and the senators were in the state of Tennessee in regards to that giving more leeway to people creating charter schools. I'm not a proponent of charter schools because we currently already have the schools. Let's improve what we got. But so what is your position on that? I heard you mention it, but then I want to hear your emphasis on it. So added take on charter schools.
Yeah, I'll be quick since I know you said we've closed. Two things I'll say are this. One, fully fund public schools, not private schools, not necessarily charter schools. Fully fund our public school system. That's where our priority should be. That's where our money should be going. That's where the overwhelming majority of our kids are. And that's where my kids are, or will be when they're old, when one of them's old enough. And that's where my wife and I came from. So that is the priority for me. And in terms of charter schools, the second thing I'll say is, except for a few ones here and there, I have not seen any research to show that they are a better investment than our public schools. So I'll stick with our public school systems.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining in on this forum. We greatly appreciate you guys for coming out. And Corinne, thank you so much, okay, for joining us, okay. And so
can I just say one quick thing?
Okay.
Just really quick. October 5th is the deadline to register to vote. If you're out there watching and you haven't registered, please register by October 5th. October 14th through the 29th are when you can early vote, and obviously November 3rd is when you can vote. Vote, vote, vote. This election is going to be on turnout. That is how we get Tennessee to be moving forward again. And I'll give you one stat. We are woefully underperforming in voter turnout. We hit nearly 40% in voter turnout. Most of the country hits like 60. So, get out there, exercise that right, and that's what'll make a difference.
Thank you. All right. I think that's all we have. Okay. Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, we'd like to thank you for being part of this event. We will be airing this on our Facebook page so that the community can get a chance to hear your positions. We regret that the other candidates weren't able to make it on. They were invited. We always invite all the candidates. So the bottom line is have a good night, and we're going to get ready for the next forum. God bless.
Thank you.